Hey everybody, John DeChristopher here again with another little peek at the archives. This little piece is from the episode I did with Denny Tedesco in December of 2021, a live from my drum room episode. And Denny, as you know, is the producer and director of the fantastic Wrecking Crew documentary, and he's also the son of legendary Wrecking Crew guitarist Tommy Tedesco, and an old friend of mine too, of course. And so this is a little something I thought I'd share with you. And you can watch the entire episode on Live from My Drum Room on YouTube. So I'll put the link in there. You can go and watch the entire episode. And don't forget to subscribe while you're there if you haven't done so already. And thank you all for supporting Live from My Drum Room and Track Talk. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you again real soon on a future episode. All right. Thanks, everybody. Peace. Yeah.
So
Well, I definitely want to talk about what I think you're working on right now, the immediate family documentary.
I,
I'd love to get to that, but I just want to, like, there's so much to talk about with the Wrecking Crew and just with you and your dad. And we've never really got into like the nuts and bolts of like what it must have been like for you as a kid growing up with Tommy Tedesco as your dad. I mean, I know you've talked about this with a lot of people.
yeah,
I feel like our relationship had a lot to do with Hal, because Hal was our mutual kind of friend,
yeah, my
and
stepfather.
kind of,
That's it.
yeah. And but I was thinking like what it must have been like to see your dad go off to work in the morning and knowing that he was going to, you know, play on a hit song or maybe five hit songs that day,
I had no idea. No, but the difference is, the truth is, had no idea. None of
Yeah,
us. I mean, dad went to work like any other dad. If you don't know that it's kind of like different, my friend's father across the street, his father was an accountant, and
hmm,
my father was a musician. I didn't know there was a difference, in terms of work and occupation. But no, dad just, he went to work and that was it. And I always tell people, instead of a saw and a drill in the trunk, he had a banjo, a Telecaster, an acoustic, and an amp, and that was his tools.
yeah,
But never, it wasn't until the 70s, because I'm born in 61, that I started realizing things were different. I think when one of the kids said, "Your dad's on the Partridge Family album," his name's on it. And oh, that's cool. I didn't realize. And then he would, if he was doing TV shows or something, like not Bonanza, but more like, I would do Chips and things like that, or
yeah,
Barnaby Jones or one of those shows. I would basically, on like, off school days, I go with him, but it was boring, watching music being done for a film and not knowing how cool it was now. But no, we had no idea. I mean, maybe other kids did, maybe Michelle and, Hal's, you know, I think certain parents included their kids more, involved them more, maybe sometimes brought them in the studios more, but not my dad. He kept it separate.
yeah. Well, that's maybe he just he respect that, right? He wanted to do that. He wanted to sort of separate church and state, so to speak. And
It totally, it's funny because I asked that about my mom, because, there's legendary stories out. My mom and my aunt and uncle went to see Strangers in the Night, being recorded, because Frank wanted a audience. I said, did he ever take you to those other dates, like Peggy Lee or anything? He goes, no, Mom, Dad always said a plumber doesn't take his wife to work, and he was joking, but it's true. I mean, when you guys go to work, you guys are musicians, you're going to work. You're
right.
not there to, it's not a social event. It becomes a social event, obviously, with musicians, but it's not that's a job.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Sometimes the
exactly.
job is the hang, and that's what I learned also, is the hang is sometimes can be more important than the music you just created,
Yeah,
because you know what, you just met someone that's going to take you, you guys are going to work together for the next 20 years now. So
yeah, yeah. Wow. And so when he'd come home from work, did he ever say, "I did this"? I did a Monkeys
Sometimes,
TV show today or something,
no,
or no.
no. It's funny. Again, it was weird because the only times, again, in the 70s, probably because I was a little more inquisitive. Dad started, I didn't see my father play guitar at home, don't forget, until 1976. And because he was, starting to do his jazz thing, his own jazz albums. And he
Yeah.
hadn't done that since the early 60s. So I was too young then. So I never really saw, he never practiced at home. He was practicing 12, 14 hours a day. So that's the last thing he ever did is pull out a guitar and start playing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until later I started becoming interested, seeing him do his albums and going, and getting a radio player, and then certain movies would come up and we would talk about it because now I'm an adult, late teens, early, and that started getting exciting because he was excited.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the other thing. I think he started getting excited with certain projects, let's say with John Williams or James Horner or something like that. And then, what got him excited? I think what brought it was remember he was doing those articles for Guitar Player magazine,
Yeah.
and that was late 70s. He started doing this article called for Guitar Players, Studio Log, I think it was called, and it was really popular. And what he did is he would take a date that he was just on, and it was if there was something to write about, he'd take the music and he'd basically talk about it. But he talked about it with I mean, I can't even. It was hilarious. Some of the things he wrote about were very funny, but he never took himself too seriously,
Yeah.
with a lot of that stuff. But that's when and also the seminars he was doing with around the country and with that MI Musicians Institute, which was GIT. I think the kids got him more excited about music, and that's what really got him back.
Yeah.
In terms of caring, not caring. You know what I mean? It was just something that they pushed him into. They asked him, "Why don't you play, live?" And he had no answer for it. In the early days, yeah, it's hard to book a gig. You're going to make $50 if you're lucky at a jazz
Yeah.
gig.
Yeah.
Versus for $2,000. So he's not going to take a chance.
Well, I was just going to say a couple of quick things. One of my biggest regrets, I was working at a music store in Boston called EU Wurlitzer from the late 70s to the mid 80s. And I
Right.
want to say the year was 1980 that your dad came in and did a
Right.
clinic. And clinics were pretty new at the time. And
Yeah.
all the guys, all the guitar players that worked in the shop, and this was a real pro store. It was the equivalent of like a
Yeah.
Manny's Music. Yeah. And all the guitar players that worked there were so excited because Tommy Tedesco was coming in and they all knew who he was. And I don't know that at that time, I don't think they'd coined the phrase wrecking crew, but they were like, this is the guy that plays on all the records, all the TV shows. And I stupidly, being a drummer, 19 or 20 years old, went home after work, didn't stick
Yeah.
around for the clinic. And people talked about that. I swear, as God is my
Yeah.
witness, Denny, for years after that, how great it was. And most of what the guys talked about, besides the information, was how funny your dad was. They just said
Yeah.
he had people in stitches. So I'll fast forward the other day, literally yesterday or the day before, I'm talking to Rick Murata, and I
Yeah.
mentioned that you were going to be here today. And the first thing Rick said was, "Oh man, his dad was amazing." He said, one of the funniest guys that he's one of the funniest guys I've ever known, besides being like an amazing musician. He said, he was just hilarious, just a great guy to be around. Just his vibe was so
That's very
positive.
cool.
Yeah. So
That's really cool. I mean, and it's funny because I get that all the time from people like yourself and any other people. The same thing, and well, if you've seen the film, which you have, that footage is from Musicians Institute 1981 seminar,
yeah,
and that was kind of like I knew I always had that in the pocket making the film, but I knew that was not just funny and lighthearted, but his stories meant something. I mean, there was a point to a story, even if there was a joke on the end of it. There, and that's what he loved sharing. It wasn't don't ask him to teach you guitar. because he would always say the kid I'm trying to teach is better than I am. He was very humble that way. But he studio musician, he could talk forever about it.
Yeah. There's so many funny things. And talking about, for everybody watching at home, if you haven't seen the film that Denny directed, The Wrecking Crew, then it's available. You can watch it on Netflix still. Is
I
it still
know,
there?
no, it's not on
It's
Netflix, but I'm excited. But wait, sent me a note the other day. It's on HBO now, HBO Max.
Oh, fantastic. Even
Yeah,
better.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
We'll find out in March if I get a check. We'll see. I hope
Well,
so.
I can
Oh, all
watch
right.
it.
So here's the thing. All your audience, go to HBO Max. I don't care if you've seen it before or whatever. Just give it a thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I need for
Yeah,
Christmas.
please. Please do that. And I'll do the same thing. Yeah. I've watched it so many times. You were so nice to send me. I think even before the DVD was final,
Oh,
you were
yeah.
sending
You
me.
saw it years before we finished it.
Yeah, and but I can watch it over and over, and I can hear the stories over and over because they're so great. And I know I'll mess these up, but there are a couple that your dad tells. Um, there's one in particular, and please cut me
Yeah.
off
Tell
and
me.
and
Oh,
and correct it if I
oh,
don't. But it has to do with the Wrecking Crew going in to do this really legit into a soundstage, maybe at Universal, and doing like a they were doing a movie, and they were doing the score for a movie, and there was a composer who put music in front of them and said, all right, now this is sheet
okay.
music.
All right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the Disney story.
Disney, okay, I
So
was
that
supposed
was
to.
right because Hal tells that story. Hal said it was right, because at the time in the late '60s, there was still there was still that, oh, you guys do records,
Yeah,
there was that. Well, the guy at Disney needed some rock and roll for this movie. It was I can't remember. It was whatever the movie was. So what they did is they got rid of all the rest of the legit players, the strings and all that, and they brought in Hal and Dad and whoever it was, the combo. And he goes, all right, guys, I'm going to lay down the music. We're going to take, the click track, and we're going to slow it down so you guys can learn it. And he goes, and then they counted it out, and they just went boom, 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 and finished it. And that was it. And then the guy was like blown away by, how'd you guys do that? And my father says, oh, we practice a lot during the day, you know. So my father had no shame. I mean, you know, the greatest thing about, I wish my father had given me, he didn't give me the music gene. I could tell you that. But I wish he had given me the sarcasm, the how to bury someone without them knowing they've been buried. And that's the thing I wish he was so good at it. He was so good at it.
yeah,
He could insult the shit out of you, with tongue in cheek. I mean, if he didn't like you, you were really in trouble.
yeah.
But he knew how to do it without, you know,
Oh,
he was, I mean, Don Randy was telling me a story recently. Um, these guys go to work, and it's like anybody else. There's 3 o'clock. God, we're going to get off of work 10 minutes early. That's great because I got to get to the next gig. And mentally, you guys as musicians, it's not, and that's the difference. I'm telling you this because we'll talk about how it's different from the next group of musicians, the Danny Korchmars, the Lelands, and the Russell and Kunkles and all that. I mean, those guys
yeah.
come in later. My dad was boom, 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 boom. There was music and there was music business, he would say. So you had to combine the two. You have to know when and what. So this day, it's music business. He's got to get in, he's got to get out. And it's like quarter to 3 before, and they run this whole thing, and it's perfect. The leader says, great, guys, go home. We're done. And Jimmy Haskell, the great arranger, says, he starts basically kissing ass. And he says, you know what? I think we could do another one. We could do another one. I feel it could be. And he's basically sucking up to the leader. And the leader's going, no, Jimmy, we got it. It's all good. It's all good. And he goes, and they're doing, and at this point, Hal's got his shit away. Dad's got his guitars in the case. They're walking out. And no, all right, Jimmy, we'll do one more. So they sit down, And Don says, your dad sits down, opens the chart up again, and he goes, and just about to go, and Jimmy's doing the countdown. He goes, Jimmy, I'm bar 14. Do you want it like this or do you want it like this? Don't do it like that. The way you, and they go, oh my God, he's doing this. He's going to take him down this road. And just every time he's about, you go, but how about bar 35? And he just takes him to this, to where there's no time left to do a take. And they're just dying, he says, in the back. They're just, because they know. And Jimmy has no idea my father took him for a ride.
Oh,
And that's the kind of shit I love the most.
yeah, me too. Me too. When I hear those stories, yeah, and Hal was the master at telling those stories. He
Oh,
became,
so good.
yeah, he was, he had a million of them.
Hal was the greatest storyteller.